Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. So, we got some huge news out of Europe, which begs the question, is the United States next? Let's shoot right over to CNBC and you'll see exactly what I am referring to. Here we go. Eurozone inflation eases. That's one way to say it. At 2.5%. As core print misses estimate. Another thing that I want to point out is the Fed's assumed target is 2%. Now, that's not a scientific number. That's a total random number. They try to make you believe is scientific. But this is the narrative they're trying to push. Well, we've got to get inflation down to 2%, 2%, 2%. And then what? And then what? That somehow the Goldilocks economy, somehow we're going to be running on all 8 cylinders then? I mean, this is just, it's complete nonsense. And really, if you think about it, what they try to get you to believe is, the fact that they try to get you to believe this and the fact that they assume you'll buy into this is, in my opinion, it's condescending, it's disrespectful, it's treating you as though you were a child. We understand they do that. But the point is, if we start to see the inflation numbers in the United States doing the exact same thing, where they're surprising to the downside, this is going to shift the narrative to where, oh, now all of a sudden, the Fed's definitely going to cut rates this year. They're going to cut by 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Now, I'm not saying it's going to work. It never has in the past, so I don't know why it will this time as far as preventing the slowdown in the economy. But what this will do is drive the stock market likely much, much higher. In other words, the bubble will become even bigger before it inevitably pops, because we're in this stage of the cycle. We talk about it on this channel all the time, where bad news is good news. And we're getting closer and closer and closer to the stage where the bad news is so obvious that it actually becomes bad news. And that's usually when the Fed drops rates. That's usually when the stock market declines the most, until the central planners do something, get right back into the next wave of bubble blowing. And who knows what on earth they will do next. But getting to the details here, like I said, headline inflation came in at 2.5%. They say core inflation, excluding volatile energy, food, alcohol, tobacco. Is alcohol and tobacco that volatile? Stayed at 2.9% from the prior month, narrowly missing the 2.8%. So core inflation a little higher. Looks like headline inflation a little lower. So I wonder what prompted the headline inflation to be lower here. The headline figure was in line with expectations. Inflation had nudged up from 2.4 in April to 2.6 in May. Core inflation excluding all the volatile stuff here. So it looks like, according to this chart, core stayed the same, services stayed the same, headline went down slightly, which was the surprise. Wasn't a huge surprise, though. But keep in mind, the European Central Bank has already dropped rates. And I don't know if you've been following the other news. The unemployment rate in Canada has gone up quite significantly. I think right now it's right around 6.5%. So this would make sense as to why they started dropping rates. But I think when we zoom out, we ask the question, if this is happening to the Eurozone, if this is happening to Canada, what is the probability that the United States avoids this type of outcome? In fact, show me the time in the past when the United States kept running on all 8 cylinders when every other single global economy was in a recession, or when all these central bankers were dropping rates and the United States somehow kept rates at 5.25%. They usually move in unison. There's a bit of a lag here and there, but the economy, the global economy, is so interconnected. It's especially with the larger developed economies. It's very unlikely that you have this outlier that is sustainable. Okay, so now let's switch over to some of the things that are happening right here in the United States. We start with jobs numbers because I think most of the Fed's decision-making process and most of what we're going to see in the real economy is going to be expressed through the labor market. And we see it start to soften dramatically. We had job openings increase today, but a large part of that was due to government jobs. So you've got the Biden administration going out there and saying, the job market's getting pretty soft. How do we make it how do we make it look a lot better than it really is? Oh, well, let's just juice the job openings by saying that we're hiring another 100,000 people. And then this goes into the report, and everyone looks at the amount of job openings increasing, say, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This means the labor market is becoming even more tight. And then the next month, they just go ahead and say, yeah, we just took 99,000 of those jobs listings down. And that's when you get these revisions that Zero Hedge pointed out today. They said 14 of the last 17 months have been revised lower. Look at this chart. I mean, come on. I mean, are we to really believe that they're not manipulating? We'll put it lightly. Are we really supposed to believe that they're not manipulating the numbers? I mean, come on. Who are we trying to kid right now? We like to make ourselves believe that whenever we see a number that fits our narrative, well, then that's legit. And we all fall victim to this. But in the United States, we like to believe that the numbers we see are accurate. We might not like the politics. We might not like the politicians, the central planners, the authoritarians. But at the very least, we have rule of law. And at the very least, our data is the best. Our data is as good as it possibly can be. As if it's a lot better than China. As if it's a lot better than these other countries. As if we don't manipulate and massage the data to the extent they do. I mean, maybe there's an argument for that in the past, but look at the data pretty much since 2022. And look at how many times it gets revised. And it gets revised to such a high percentage that I don't think you can just call that a fluke. I mean, look at this chart. Is that you're really going to look at all the red bars? You're really going to tell me that you can have 14 of the last 17 months and it's just, and this is totally random? I don't think so. Now let's get over to Market Watch, another story which I think sheds light on what's happening in the U.S. economy and the probability of the U.S. economy experiencing continued disinflation. And I'm not here saying that that disinflation is a result of additional productivity or additional goods and services being created, which would be a healthy type of disinflation, if not deflation. I'm talking about the disinflation that is a result of aggregate demand going down that could be triggered by a reduction in asset prices that obviously would bring aggregate demand down to a huge degree because the entire U.S. economy is built on the everything bubble, if you will. So home buyers who could barely afford their homes are a hit with TikTok viewers. So if this is not sign of the times, I don't know what is. And if you're sitting there trying to argue that the U.S. economy is running on all 8 cylinders and the U.S. economy is booming, really? Look at this. So many people are so stretched to buy their house that they literally can't even afford to furnish it once they buy it. Let's keep going on down the article. Buying a house is so expensive these days. Well, yeah, it's so expensive, but also people's purchasing power is so low. Look, if the rate of home prices have increased at the same degree that wages have increased, well, you wouldn't have a problem, would you? So it's not necessarily the problem being home prices increasing. It's home prices increasing while wages are flat, if not down. That's the problem. So making light of this struggle to afford a house, TikTok users have taken to making videos of themselves sitting in empty dwellings with the caption, "When you had just enough for a down payment." By the way, How on earth are these people getting a mortgage? I mean, we like to sit there and tell ourselves that the liar loans and everything that went on in 2006 and 2007, well, thank goodness all those bad lending practices, they're not happening today. Really? What bank is giving someone a loan that can't even afford furniture? That's like giving someone a loan to buy a Ferrari that can't afford to change the oil. That's unsustainable. You're setting that person up for failure. What you're doing is you're just setting that person up in a position where their home price or their home has to appreciate in value. And if it doesn't appreciate in value, most likely they're going to be underwater and they're going to be in a position where they have to sell and they lose whatever minuscule down payment they made to begin with. I mean, it's literally the exact same stuff. It's just history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. And by the way, if you can't afford to put furniture in the house, how the hell are you going to afford the property insurance? How are you going to afford the property taxes? How are you going to afford a new roof? How are you going to afford when your hot water heater goes out? How are you going to afford to maintain the property? There's no chance. There's no chance. So you get into this position where your house just deteriorates around you and basically becomes not necessarily a living quarters, but more so a tool shed. And you're just living in this tool shed that's completely dilapidated and then just hoping that you can sell it to a greater fool. But misery loves company, I guess. So as long as you can post how bad your life sucks on TikTok, then I guess it isn't that bad. People often become house poor because they lack a clear strategy when purchasing their home. No, because they're given a loan that they can't afford, because they're buying a house they can't afford. It's not because they lack a strategy. What are we talking about here? Let's just call a spade a spade. They get swept up in the excitement and realtor hype, overlooking the importance of having a solid plan. Okay, again, who the hell's lending them money? I'll tell you who. That would be the government. You say, no, George, what are you? It's the banks. No, it's not. Because the banks are just a loan originator. They pawn that garbage paper off on Fannie and Freddie before the ink is dry. So this is all happening as a result of government involvement, government creating these economic distortions that at some point in time always end poorly. In these videos, people show themselves enjoying their new residences, often with no furniture or household items inside. In many instances, I mean, they might as well be living in a tent. They're living in an indoor tent. They're basically camping. In many instances, these people post themselves eating on the floor instead of a table, napping on the floor instead of a bed, and watching a blank wall instead of TV. You've got to be kidding me. Look at this guy. He's on look at this. Wow. I hope you could, I know you can't hear the audio there, but you could just see those short clips of those videos. That's just, it's unbelievable that these people, look, here's the punchline. If there are an entire generation of people basically doing this, and the entire economy is predicated upon home prices going up or supply being low, I think it's a better way of saying it. Are you honestly going to tell me that most of these people are going to be able to keep their home over the long run? Let's say we do get inflation. How? They can't even afford a coffee maker. They can't, I mean, this is just bananas. Bananas. So this is just one of these anecdotal pieces of evidence that you have to combine with everything else to figure out what the probabilities are, because there are no certainties, but what the probabilities are of the U.S. economy going into a recession. And recession is disinflationary or potentially even deflationary. Now, I know a lot of you right now are saying, George, are you kidding me? Prices are never going to go down. It's just inflation to the moon. Now, if you have a GFC type of event, if you have a significant recession, even if it's not a financial crisis, you're going to see more disinflation. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't see another wave of inflation once the central planners respond to whatever crisis we have in front of us at the time. But these types of stories and what is happening right now with aggregate demand, what is happening right now with commercial real estate, what is happening right now with the overall banking system, that leads to recession, but that leads to disinflation, if not deflation, short term. The question then becomes, what happens next? And that's why my view is the 2020s look more like the 1940s, where it's not the 1970s where you go up and up and up in a roller coaster ride as far as the degree to which prices are increasing, but it's the 1940s where prices go way high and they come crashing down. Then you have a year of deflation, and then you have another 2 years of massive inflation. So by the end of the 1940s, even though it's this roller coaster ride, prices are still quadruple what they were at the beginning of the 1940s, even though you had 2 or 3 years of consumer price deflation, which was a result of huge recessions, if not economic depressions. Now, I'm not saying that's what it was in the 1940s, although I think that's what they had in 1949, was a significant recession. But I'm saying that's likely how it plays out in the 2020s, because so much of our economy is predicated upon asset prices, which will likely deflate even during a time when consumer prices are going up. Let's look at the GFC, 2006 to 2012. What happened to prices of homes? You guys know this. They went straight down. What happened to prices? They went up. They went up during the exact same time. Talk about prices of goods and services, while you still had a quarter of deflation in 2009. So main takeaway here is we're seeing surprises to the downside in Europe. Well, the market is surprised. I don't think any of us are surprised that are paying attention. And we're seeing the unemployment rate really start to spike in Canada and other places around the world. And based on all of the evidence, you would assume that we will likely see the same thing play out here in the United States. And the cycle repeats. So the Fed sees the stuff hitting the fan, they drop rates, the curve steepens out, is no longer inverted. You get the drop in asset prices, you get some disinflation, deflation. The government responds, create the economic distortions that takes you right back to the next wave of consumer price inflation. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. As always, make sure that you're standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. We'll see you in the next video.